chapter 8. Hosea chapter 8. Tonight we're going to talk about spiritual delusion. What we've seen in the prophecy of Hosea has been immensely powerful. What we're seeing here is a picture of a people who do not know God and a people who offer ultimately a false repentance. They don't have a relationship with God, but the problem ultimately is that they think they do. And I think as you think about the idea of spiritual delusion for a moment, that's perhaps one of the hardest aspects, that there would be a recognition in ourselves if we really do have a right relationship with God, or actually if we're deluded into thinking that. And if we are deluded in that, how do you pop that bubble so that you would see if you're in relationship with God or not? That's what God is going to do here in Hosea chapter 8. He's going to say some powerful things. I've typically taken a couple chapters at a time, but Hosea chapter 8, you just have God laying out picture after picture after picture, trying to get Israel to understand their condition before God. Notice in Hosea chapter 8 and verse 1, as it is set before us, it says there, "Set the trumpet to your lips. One like a vulture is over the house of the Lord, because they have transgressed my covenant and rebelled against my law. To me they cried, 'Oh my God, we Israel know you.' Israel has spurned the good. The enemy has pursued you." I want you to notice in these first three verses, what you ultimately have is a spiritual disconnect. What God says in the first verse is essentially prepare for judgment. Sound the trumpet, sound the alarm. A warning of judgment is to come. The eagle or the vulture is flying overhead. Expectation of a foreign nation is going to come upon them and bring about this judgment. And God expresses the reason why. They transgressed my covenant. They have rebelled against my law. And then notice the disconnect after God says, "Here, sound the alarm and wake up, because judgment is coming. You've transgressed my covenant. You've rebelled against my law." The very next line is, look at what the people are saying. They're saying, "My God, we're Israel. We know you. What do you mean judgment? Hey, we're the people of God. We're in relationship with you. We call upon you. You know us. And so how could we possibly be judged?" It is fascinating to see that all the while as the prophet Hosea is prophesying to them and declaring the ways of God, the people are saying, "We have a relationship with God. What are you talking about? What do you mean judgment? What do you mean we need to change our ways? What do you mean to call to repentance? We know God. We know who He is. We have a relationship with Him. We cry out to Him." Listen, we'll cry out to Him now. "God, we are Israel. We're the people of God. You know us." And notice God's response in verse 3. Israel has spurned the good. Essentially, you aren't living up to the claim. You're saying you know God, but you don't act like you know God. There is nothing in what you are doing that lives up to your claims. And it's for God to say, you have spurned the good. Here is such an important picture of, here is God telling them, you have all the right words. You say all the right things. You sound like you are the people of God. You sound like you care about the ways of God. But when I come and look at you, you've transgressed my covenant. You've rebelled against my law. You have spurned the good. And that is why the enemy is coming against you. That's why you're going to be judged. And so this disconnect that is happening here is so important that God identifies and helps us look at this and go, there is the possibility in believing that you are in relationship with God, when in fact all the while you're rejecting God's purposes for you. One of the things that Israel was called to do was to reflect the image of God, that they would be the light to the nations, that they would be salvation to the ends of the earth. And yet here is God saying, you don't even do good. You You don't reflect the image of God. You do not show the goodness of God. You are not extending the glory of God to the nations. And when you study a little bit of Israel's history, and if you've grown up in the pews, you would probably remember that the nation of Israel had 0 good kings identified by God. Not a single one walks in the ways of God. And yet here are the people saying, we know you, God. We're with you. We're in relationship, right? We're fine. And God says, no, we are not in relationship with each other. And what he's going to do now is try to expose, why is this the case? Why are they in this spiritual delusion? What is the ultimate reality behind this? And as we look at some of the things that Israel is doing, it will help us see the things that we may also be doing when it comes to this spiritual delusion. Notice the beginning of verse 4. When it says there, they made kings, but not through me. They set up princes, but I knew it not. As these 3 verses unfold, what we're going to see is Israel is depending on other things rather than depending upon God. There are 2 things that are identified in these 3 verses. The first thing that is identified by God in terms of them putting their hope and their trust in the wrong things is that they trusted in their leaders. They trusted in their kings. You are appointing and making these kings, but you didn't do it through me. You did not consult God. You did not ask him who should be our leader, who should we appoint. They appointed their own leaders and their own kings and put their hope and their trust in them. And that is the picture that is often seen as a failure for Israel and as well as for Judah, is placing their hope and their future value and prosperity and security and all that lies ahead in their leaders. The leaders are going to save us. The leaders are going to give us what we need. And so we will appoint our leaders. They appointed their kings. And here's God saying, you never asked me about who these people were that you were appointing. You made them kings, but I didn't know them. And you didn't consult me in the process of appointing your kings and of setting up your princes. You didn't do that through me. I think this is something very important for us to take a minute and put our finger on for the nation of Israel and consider how easy it is to do that. We live and breathe in a culture that makes its saviors be our political leaders. They are going to rescue us. They are going to save us. They are going to give us everything we want. They are going to give us everything we need. Over and over again, you see that in all kinds of civilizations, and you see it as well as ours. And it is easy for us to bind up all of our hopes and dreams and futures in what Congress or president or mayor or whatever elected official it is. And the way our system works, they're encouraged to do that. Here are all the things we're going to do to rescue you. You know, this is where we've run this cycle every 2 years with representatives and every 4 years with presidents. It's constantly them coming and saying, I'm the guy to save your life. I'm going to fix everything. I'm going to make your life so much better. I'm going to be your rescuer. I'm going to be the one to save you. And here is ultimately God looking at Israel. And here is Israel putting all of their hopes on their kings. They're going to be the ones to give us our prosperity. They're going to be the ones to rescue. And we must always remember that the only reason this nation has any security or any prosperity is because God gives it to us. He has blessed us. He has given to us richly. It is only by Him that we either rise or fall. I think about that over history, and you think about the great Roman Empire, a civilization that never believed that it would ever be wiped out. And the relics of its monumental empire still stand. An empty Colosseum still sits in the city of Rome, now as a monument to people who believed that their political system and their way of life and their prosperity and their leaders would never end. And they did. And we must not forget it. Political parties come and go, leaders come and go, and ultimately, why would we put our hope in wicked people being put in charge to give us what we want? God is in charge. God is the reason we have this success. God is the reason why this nation stands. God is the reason why it will fall. God is the reason why we have security and prosperity. Israel lost sight of that, and verse 4 is so powerful. They made kings, not through me. Wasn't by the will of God. God was not consulted in the process. His ways were not put into that, and therefore that is the first judgment that is laid on them. They had these saviors that were false saviors for them. The second follows right with it in the middle of verse 4. With their silver and gold they made idols for their own destruction. I have spurned your calf, O Samaria. My anger burns against them. How long will they be incapable of innocence? For it is from Israel. A craftsman has made it. It is not God. The calf of Samaria shall be broken in pieces. Notice again the image. They aren't trusting in God. They trust in their leaders and they trust in their idols. And you have to appreciate the question that God asks. It is so humorous how God always tries to break the idolatry that is in the hearts of the people. He uses that here when he says in verse 6, a craftsman made it. That's not God. And it can't save you if a human made it. And that's what here God goes, well, why would you put your hope in that? Why would you put your salvation in that? Why would you think that could be a help or a hope to you? God is asking us, why would we put our hope in our home, our car, our job, our money, or anything else in this life? We make these things. Why would that be where our hope is tied up? Why would we think that our life depends upon those things and put our trust in those things? They are not God's. They cannot help us. They cannot save us. They do not have the power to rescue our lives. And this is Israel's failure and all of their prosperity. Remember, Israel's a prosperous nation. They are wealthy. And in all of that prosperity, it caused them to look to their leaders, and it caused them to look at their idols of wealth rather than look at God. And notice the big punch that God gives now in verse 7 because of that. Verse 7 it reads, for they sow the wind, and they reap the whirlwind. I want you to just think about that idea for a moment. Sowing wind. And it probably would help if we were in a more agrarian society and you thought about how ludicrous it would look to walk around sowing wind. Not seed, not what would make sense, but wind. That's what the people are doing. And so often in the scriptures, wind is used as a picture of emptiness or foolishness or worthlessness. You're sowing wind. You are sowing emptiness. You are trusting and investing in things that don't matter, that do not last, that are complete emptiness. And by doing that, by sowing to vanity and futility and emptiness, he says there is only one outcome. If you want to sow the wind, guess what you're going to find? The whirlwind. You notice the play on words that he makes. You want wind, you're going to get wind. Sowing the wind is going to reap judgment. It's going to reap the whirlwind from God. And so he's giving us this picture that when we sow to this life, we make such an investment in this world. When we care so much about physical things and worldly things and our desires and our idols and our wants and our wishes and our comforts, here is this picture of God saying, here was what you're going to have. You're going to reap the whirlwind. The wind is going to come back to you, and you're going to find the emptiness, and you're going to find the judgment that you've sown to. As I thought about this declaration that God makes through Hosea to the prosperous people of Israel, I just think about how easy it is to sow the wind. It is so easy for us to invest our time and our efforts and our thoughts and our worries and our anxieties on things that seem to be so important in this world that at the end of the day, and especially in the lens of eternity, are not that important at all. I think about the things that we will often spend our time in. You think about standing before God and saying that what we spent our efforts in and what we invested in was how important our job was, how much money we made, how comfortable we were, how much entertainment we took in. These were the things that took up our time and occupied our senses. We spent all of our efforts in that. We would stand before God and say that that was our investment. But God is always calling for us to do is to recognize it is the things of God that have a spiritual return. The things of this world do not. And yet it is so easy to neglect the things of the greatest value, the things of God that will give us an eternal return, and live in a spiritual delusion that we are investing in God when actually we're not. We're investing in this life. We're investing in the here and now. We're investing in our idols, and we're investing in our leaders, and we're investing in our stuff and our possessions, and we're investing and sowing right here. And here's God saying, you know when you sow to all those things, you're sowing the wind. You're just sowing the wind. And what you're going to get at the end of sowing the wind is a reaping of the whirlwind. In fact, that's the picture of verse 7. Notice the double meaning that happens here in verse 7. He says the rest of verse 7, the standing grain has no heads, it shall yield no flour. If it were to yield, strangers would devour it. So here is this picture of your prosperity is going to be taken away in judgment. But there's a double meaning here because he's also referring to this is what the people are. This is what they are like. Because a headless stalk is worthless. Can you just imagine? Here's this grain of wheat. There's no head to it. Well, what good is that? And that's what he's describing here. The standing grain has no heads. And ultimately, that's a picture of the people. Because look at verse 8. Israel is swallowed up already. They are among the nations as a useless vessel. They've lost all their distinctiveness. We look just like the world when we sow and invest in this life. They're just like them. There's no distinction. Israel was supposed to stand different and show why investing in God and why giving your time to God and sowing to God was a valuable effort. And they didn't do it. They said all the words. Our God, we Israel know you. And yet all of their actions showed that they were more concerned with this life. It is such an easy thing to fall into, and thus that's what you see Israel doing. Verses 9 and 10 show again false trust again. They run to Assyria, they run to Egypt. Everybody's going to rescue them but God. Their hope is in this life. Their hope is in this world. And that's all they've done is invest in this world rather than God. And notice the big picture now comes about in verses 11 through 14, because ultimately what God now is going to picture here is that when we reject God, God must reject us. That's what happens here in this play. Verse 11. Because Ephraim has multiplied altars for sinning, they have become to him altars for sinning. You are spending your altars and you're not worshiping God. You just build altars and you go to your idols and to all of your stuff, and you just offer yourself on the altars of this life, the prosperity of this world, the cares of this life. And God says, if that's the way it is, then It's not possible for us to be in relationship. I think verse 12 is stunning. Listen to verse 12. God says, were I to write for him, speaking of Ephraim, Israel, if I were to write for him my laws by the 10,000s, they would be regarded as a strange thing. Here are the people of God. And God says, if I gave my laws all over again and handed it to them, they would look at it and try to figure out what in the world that thing was. What is this that you are giving me? What is this? If I were to write all of my laws down, they would say, this is poor. We don't understand. There is such then a lack of knowledge of God that is being pictured here. Think about this amazing idea. The people of God have no idea what God wants. The people of God have no idea who God is. This makes no sense. You're supposed to be the people of God. That's your very definition. You are the people of God. Therefore, you know God. And yet they remain in this spiritual delusion. We have seen this idea again and again in the book of Hosea, where the people have been pictured as having a lack of knowledge. Remember, God said earlier, my people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge. They don't know God, and they don't realize it. And you see this especially in verse 13. As for my sacrificial offerings, they sacrifice meat and eat it, but the Lord does not accept them. I want you to notice, the worship of God hasn't stopped. It's not like you have a bunch of rebels here going, we have just cast off all the things of God, and we are never going to do anything for God again. So, in our terminology, we just say, shut down worship, stop prayer, no more Lord. So we're not doing it anymore. That's not what they're doing. The worship continues. They offer the sacrifices. They're doing things that are causing them to be in the delusion because they do all the externals. And all the while, they don't know God. The idea of worshiping without a love for God, without a knowledge of God, is just as much the sowing of the word. We do these things, and there's not the heart's intent behind it. If God ever becomes a ritual or obligation, it becomes something that we do. We have to go to church, probably the worst sentence ever. We just have to do these things out of obligation. It's just what God wants. And if we can, knock out our 3 hours today, God will, be pleased and we'll get back to him next Sunday. Notice that's what God is dealing with here with the people of Israel. They're saying, we know you, God. We're the people of God. We know you. And they're even keeping the worship going. And God says, if I were to hand all my laws to you, you wouldn't even know what it said. You would have no idea what it's about. It is such a danger because it is so easy for our prosperity to keep us away from God. I do believe this is Satan's greatest threat, is that in all of our prosperity we become distracted, we become overscheduled, we become busy, and we can be consumed by this life, and we begin to invest in this life, and we forget the ways of God, and we actually don't know God. Oh no, we don't say that we don't know God. We still say, Lord, people of God, we love you, we know you, and we still do the forms of worship, but it's actually delusion. It's actually all false. It's all only words, and it's only some externals. But ultimately, notice God says in verse 14, Israel has forgotten his maker. They look like they've made the part. They look like everything about being the people of God. But ultimately, they're not the people of God. I want to end by just simply asking 3 questions. 3 questions to help us alert ourselves if we may be also experiencing the same kind of spiritual delusion that the people of Israel had. And I use the same images and figures from our chapter in our questions. The first question that I think we must always keep in mind is to ask ourselves, what exactly are we sowing? If you think about your life and you think about what you do every day, and you think about what goes on in a typical week, to ask yourself simply the question, what are you sowing? Jesus used really the same imagery, if you think about that. In Matthew chapter 6, Jesus said, do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. Notice it's the same idea. He is asking the question of us, so what are you investing in? Where are your treasures? What is most valuable to you? Is it in this life or is it in heaven? Is it in the things of God? What do we sow to? And when we invest in the treasures on this earth, what we are doing is we are sowing to the wind. What we are doing is we are sowing to emptiness. But there's nothing in this world that's going to last. There's not a thing in this world that is going to last. And I hope one of the things that we would do with this first question of we ask ourselves, what are we sowing, is that we need to think about our actions in terms of investing for eternity. Because that's ultimately what we're doing. So many of the parables give us that kind of picture of here are these people and the various things that they are doing. The picture is, so who is ultimately investing in the things of God, and who is it ultimately is not investing in the things of God, the things of this world? We must ask ourselves, what are we sowing to? Can you imagine if we did lose our souls because we invested so much in our comforts, we invested so much in our entertainment, our possessions, our wealth, our careers, whatever it is in this life, rather than investing in the things of God? The second question. First, what are we sowing? And then the second question follows closely with it. What do we expect to reap? I think that's a very important question that also lends itself to some important introspection. What am I sowing to? Where are my efforts? What is my time? Where's my treasures? Where's my heart lie? And then what do I expect is going to be the outcome of that? As Hosea asks the question, as he puts it forward, sowing to wind is going to reap wind. Is going to reap the whirlwind. And so here now is the same question. Jesus did the same thing as well. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, is going to enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. On that day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and cast out demons in your name, and do many mighty works in your name? Then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness. Now, I want to caution something here, because it is very easy for us to take that passage, and what we like to do is apply that to all the religious people out there, and we say, yeah, all those people out there who say they know God, they don't know God because you got to do the works of God. And that's an easy one to, okay, what about us? What about us? Now, we would say that we're doing all these things for God. And then Jesus would say, I don't know you. We don't have a relationship. It's exactly what happened in Hosea's day. The people are running around saying, we're the people of God. We're Israel. We know you. God says, I don't know you. What are we expecting to read? For us, we must always realize it's not sufficient for us to say that we know God. And I think it's so important for us to just think about what does it look like in our lives? What are we expecting to receive back from God? What are we sowing? And what ultimately are we going to reap? We are called to be the light of the world. We are called to be different. We are called to show the world that our values are different, our priorities are different, that the things that matter to us are different, and the things we put our hopes in this life are very different. And it is sad when we look, talk, and act like peoples whose hopes and dreams are all right here, just like everybody else. What are we sowing? What are we reaping? And then the final question, what is our functional Savior? One of the things that I think is fascinating to see as you go through the book of Hosea, and you ultimately see it in every prophetic book, is that they are putting their hope and trust in something else. Every single time when you read the prophets, what you see is that it is the people who do not put their hope and trust in God. They put their hope and trust in something else. And I would suppose that if we were alive in 722 to 740 BC, around the days of Hosea, and we took a poll of the people of Israel, and we asked them, do you put your hope in something else besides God? They would say, of course not. We believe in God, and our hopes and dreams are in God alone. It is always we believe that we do not have functional saviors. We believe that there's always, we're trusting in God, and we would never trust in the things of this world. And yet, in spite of that, what we saw in verse 4 is that the people of Israel put their hopes in their kings and in their leaders. From verse 4 to verse 6, they put their hope in their idols. You see in verses 9 and 10, they put their hopes in Assyria, they put their hopes in Egypt, they put their hopes in all kinds of things. And yet they stood up and said, oh no, we know God. You know us, God, we're good. And so trying to find out if we have a functional Savior, if we are living in spiritual delusion, trying to come up with a good question to figure that out. I might come up with a better one than this, but these are two that I came up with to try to really zero in on who is our rescuer. Number one would be, where do you turn for comfort and for rescue? And the other question that goes very closely with it is, what do you need to make your life better? Israel thought if they had more wealth, their lives would be better. They thought if Egypt or Assyria would come to their rescue, their lives would be better. They believed if they could have different kings, then their lives would be better. They had all kinds of ideas of how their lives would be better. And one of the messages that God is always trying to teach us, that God is always trying to show us, is that there is one answer to that question. We need more of God. I had a great discussion with somebody this morning who just said, when things get hard and tough, it's just so easy to give out on it and let God go to the side. There's such this inversion that happens that it seems like when things get tough, we give up God. When actually, He's the one you need the most.
Yes.
He is the place you've got to turn to because He needs to be the rescuer and Savior. He is the one that will make your life better. He is the one to turn to for comfort. Do not ever think of God as the problem. God's not the problem. God is never the problem. In our study of the Psalms, I would like for you to put that in the context of what we've been looking at in our Sunday morning Bible class. When we see David in each of these Psalms, what does David think is going to make his life better? Every time those Psalms are saying, more of God. Every single time those Psalms are saying, I need more of God. That's what I need. That's my rescuer. That's my hope. That's my help. That's my trust. That's my salvation. That's my fortress. That's my rock. That's what I will depend upon. Lord, I come to you and I offer up my prayers, and you will be the one to deliver me. You will hear me in the depths, and just constantly expressing that again and again. That's what we see of a person who understands that hope and trust and life is not about an investment here, but an investment in God. what we need to make life better is. Israel didn't understand that. And God says, sound the trumpet, sound the alarm, the vulture is circling, because you say you know God. You offer up your worship, but you really don't believe that the answer to your life is more of God. And there was spiritual delusion. Let's go to God in prayer. Our Heavenly Father, it is just so easy for us, just so easy for us to be captured by the culture and the values and the way of thinking of this world. And God, you have given us so much prosperity. You have given this country security. You have blessed us almost beyond measure, perhaps in all of history. And it is easy for us to just take that for granted and believe that it's by our wisdom and by our efforts and by our talents and by our might. And it causes us to forget that you are why we have everything. God, we thank you for all of our prosperity. We thank you for this country. We thank you for our security. We thank you that we have religious freedom. We thank you for all the benefits that we have in this country and in this land. It is immense. It is amazing. It is from your hand. But God, please wake us up. Please wake us up if we are in a delusion to think that we will just say the right words and continue to invest in this life rather than. Help us to be critical of ourselves in that way, to truly look into the mirror of your law and consider if our hopes are here or if our hopes are with you. If we believe that our rescue is here or if you are our rescuer. Please awaken our hearts to see the answer to everything in this life is that we need more of you and we need far less of this world. Help us to see ourselves as strangers in this land. And let us never forget that we are citizens of an eternal kingdom and that we belong to you. In Jesus' name.
Amen.
We'll sing an invitation song. We do invite you to come to Jesus. If we can help you in any way, if you feel that you have been walking in a way that is more double-minded, investing in this life and not the things of God, can we help you work out of this? Or anything that we can do to encourage you and that I pray for you, whatever it is, but most I would certainly encourage you to make changes in your life before it is too late. Invest in the kingdom of God and seek Him with all of your heart. Can we help you do that? Won't you come while we sing?